Hi again, everyone. From Cedar Rapids, I'm Bob Ask with my story. My life in the context of history. History that I lived and have lived for a long time. History that I studied as my profession, and history as I have now had a chance to teach it, still even today at my age. Today, in a series of 20 overall that we have proposed, vignette number 5. The title of our lesson or session today is My 1940s, my high school and college years, during and after World War II. I compartmentalize the decade of the 40s very handily like this. The decade is split into halves from a national scene. First half, war. Second half, peace. For me personally, first half, high school. Second half, college, with a brief interim that I'll mention shortly. I'll cover my material quickly, I think, although you could spend hours and hours, obviously. We're not dictating the entire scope of things. Just a word about how I, in high school, was looking at the war going on every year I was there. And then, from there, my high school, what I was doing while viewing that war. A quick look at the interim, and then we go to college and take a look there. Very quickly, we'll refer much more about my college situation and events in coming vignettes. But just this today, a few headlines, and then I'd like to conclude today with what's going on in the cultural side of things, like we've tried to do with the 20s and the 30s. What's going on in the culture, music, shows, athletics. That will be our coverage and our approach. I'll never forget that Sunday, December 7th, 1941, when Franklin Roosevelt later referred to a day that will live in infamy. As a 15-year-old with my family, coming home from church on that Sunday, to turn on the radio and hear that Pearl Harbor in Hawaii has been attacked by the Empire of Japan. Well, it was a shocker. Most of us had never heard of Pearl Harbor. We knew, of course, about Hawaii. All government officials, we now know that they knew the trouble was brewing very closely. But like one sailor boy at Pearl Harbor that day famously said, "Hell, I didn't even know they were mad at us." Well, here was the headline. War. The Japanese have attacked Hawaii. World War II after those years of war clouds that we noticed brewing over Suze, had finally caught up with us. And that is the Honolulu Star newspaper announcing its final arrival. As to my high school days, well, we read that in headlines, of course, every day in the paper. I lost 3 of my buddies in the war. And every day there was a mention in the Ottumwa Courier, somebody else, maybe that I knew, had been killed far off at Guadalcanal or Okinawa, or later on Iwo Jima, and much later the Bulge. So I would be reading about it, and finally, of course, the good news in 45, VE and VJ Day, when it finally came to a conclusion mid-decade. But now, when I was in high school, I was a student, academically, still pursuing, I can tell now, my being a history teacher, still interested in sports, but after having played them all, I have one real, still regrettable bit of news in my thinking. I was curtailed by a foot problem that knocked me out of some of the things that, to the measure that I would like to have accomplished them as an athlete with the Ottumwa Bulldogs. It kind of curtailed some of my efforts. Fortunately, I was able to later overcome that disappointment with a long basketball college career. But those were activity-wise, academically, how many? Well, I guess I got to brag a little bit. It's news, you know. Of a class of 320, I was chosen outstanding boy of my class. So apparently there were some good things going on. And when my high school career came to an end, the war would come to an end. Now, as to that mid-decade interim between high school and college, this is what happened. To make a long story short, I was drafted, went to Camp Dodge in Des Moines, into the service, down to St. Louis, Jefferson Barracks, where I took another physical, and surprisingly, all of a sudden, in line, they asked me, "What do you want? Army or Navy?" Now, I hadn't thought about it, but I had to make a split-second decision. I said Navy, I suppose, because my brother John was in the Navy. Well, we went out to Farragut, Idaho. I was in boot camp. And then, again, a surprise, another physical. Why? I never did know. Apparently, they were doing a little downsizing, but this time, that foot problem showed its ugly head, and I wasn't in the service very long. I returned, kind of disappointedly, because I always highly respected those who served and served long and well. But it wasn't God's plan. It was for me, after a brief stint in the Navy, to go to college. the second half of the 1940s, just a quick introduction, was at a little college in Oskaloosa, Iowa, that my family and I would learn to love. 4 years at William Penn, now William Penn University. That's where I met Marilyn. Oh, that story's coming up soon. That's where I played basketball. That story will be included. And with my brother John, 2 years as teammates. Those were good years at William Penn, and you'll hear more about my love of that little school in coming vignettes. As for the decade overall, where there were, of course, a lot of other news items that I remember even down through the ages since. I'll bet you've heard, I'll bet you remember some of these cultural entities. South Pacific and Oklahoma, 2 great shows. There was the coming of the jitterbug and its European version or facsimile, the Lambeth Walk. Elizabeth Taylor, Dinah Shore, drive-in movies. Perry Como, he was born in 1926. Who else did we say was born in 1926? There was Jackie Robinson, the GI Bill of Rights, Burns and Alley, DiMaggio, Joe Louis, Zoot Suits, Frank Sinatra, Glenn Miller, Betty Grable, the Chattanooga Choo-Choo, Edward R. Murrow, and the News at Night. There was White Christmas, the greatest Christmas song outside of the spiritual hymns ever written. Jack Benny, Fred Allen on Sunday night, and their supposed feud Sunday after Saturday. Jukebox Saturday night. Those were the 40s in radio and Hollywood, golden years. And we'll have much more alluding back to the 40s later on. Bye now. See you next time.